Meu grande amigo John Bandler. A gente compartilha inúmeros cursos nos Estados Unidos sobre lavagem de dinheiro. É um grande prazer tê-lo com a gente para debater sobre cybercrime. Seja bem-vindo ao Cybersecurity Summit 2021.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Raphael. As you can see, and you heard, I'm talking about cybercrime, cybersecurity, technology, and law. Very excited to give this presentation for you. And first, a thank you. Thank you to the hosts, the Cybersecurity Summit 2021 Brazil, Raphael. It's really great to be here. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to me. I put in a lot of effort into this. I hope it shows. I hope you get something out of it. And I hope it'll be thought-provoking too. Maybe you hear things and think of things in a way that you did not think about before. So today I'm going to discuss some important concepts, and we'll lay out how they intersect and how they evolved. I'm going to talk about business. Business includes capitalism, commerce, buying and selling goods and services and paying for it. We're going to think a little bit about how that evolves. We're going to talk about law, look at how that evolved and where we are now. We've got traditional laws that we need to know, and we've got new laws specifically enacted to address the concerns of technology. And of course, I'm going to talk about technology, computers, the internet, and data, and how much technology has changed and changed us. I'm also going to talk about crimes and the bad things that people do. And sometimes people do things and they rise to a level of a crime, which, it's something that government can punish us for, even take away liberties, put us in jail. And I'm also going to talk about wrongs, because sometimes people do something wrong and it's not a crime, it's a civil wrong. It violates a civil law. And there's a fancy Latin lawyer word for a wrong that's a tort. T-O-R-T, but the common sense or the plain language name for that is a wrong. Now, each of these areas are complex on their own, but really they intersect in lots of different ways. And that's where things get even more complex, because we're looking at the intersection of these four areas, and that can be confusing. And these areas are evolving so rapidly. So today, my talk, a little bit of an introduction, briefly tell you about myself, and we're talking mainly about the foundations, evolution, intersections of technology and the internet, business, law, well, before that, cybercrime and cybersecurity, and law. And I put law in bold because I'm going to spend more time talking about that, and I'm a lawyer, and sometimes it's helpful to have a lawyer explain things simply, and that's what I try to do. Talk a little bit about cybersecurity guidance or frameworks, a little bit about incident response. We need to investigate incidents to know what they are, to respond properly. And we'll talk compliance. How do we harmonize all those laws and the guidance, the frameworks, so that organizations do the things that they should do to protect themselves? I'll talk for a minute about, are we fighting cybercrime effectively? And I'll get, spoiler alert, my answer is no. We need to do things differently. And then I'll take your questions through the chat. So I'm not going to talk much about me, but just tell you, my background is law enforcement. I spent 20 years in law enforcement, 8 as a police officer. I was a state trooper in New York State, where I gave full police services and highway patrol, but mostly regular policing. And then I was a prosecutor at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Manhattan meaning New York County and New York City. And I was there for 13 years. And among other things, I investigated cybercrime, and I got a front row seat on early cybercrime. I investigated it. I got my on-the-job learning. I was investigating data trafficking and virtual currency money laundering before it was in the news then. I did a lot of study, got those certifications. I am proud of them, but it took a lot of study to get them. I did pass the tests, and I wrote those 2 books, and I'm a lawyer in the United States, in New York, Connecticut, and District of Columbia, not licensed to practice law in Brazil. So that's enough about me. And if we look back about 25 years, think about how 3 main areas intersected. So technology, I kind of gave it a small bubble way back then because it was really in its infancy, and you compare it to technology today, small bubble. Now, business, as I've mentioned, has been around a long time, always has been. Capitalism, commerce, that's how some very great things get done. And law's been around a long time too. And all those 3 intersect, but look where all 3 intersect. And this is my opinion, of course. It's not a scientific study, but this intersection right here is a tiny slice. Think about cybercrime for profit back then. It was just beginning, an infant, and privacy concerns were less. So that's 25 years ago. And what's changed? Let's think about technology and the internet, how they came into being and it evolved. And remember what it was like really not so long ago when the internet first started? Privacy threats were minimal. Theft of data was pretty minimal. We were not connected all the time. You remember those first connections with dial-up? You sit at your desktop computer, you use your single phone number to dial into the internet, and maybe you're paying by the minute, so you download your emails, surf the internet, and then you disconnect. Now compare that with today, where we are constantly connected. We've got a smartphone on us like it's another body part. You know, imagine if you lose your smartphone, or it's broken, or you forget it, we're lost. What do we do? Well, not too long ago, you know, we didn't have them, and now it is essential for us. So all of this data is being collected and created and transmitted constantly, tons of data, and cybercrime today is rampant, profitable, largely undeterred. So that's technology and the internet. And think about some of the things that have come from technology and the internet. What's that created? It's created 2 types of opportunities. One is business opportunities, right? So capitalism, innovation, entrepreneurship, that never stops. So obviously they look to technology, the internet, and data, and what business opportunities are there, and it's transformed us. Ways to create, collect, use that data, apps, services, advertising, and I could throw out all of those buzzwords too, you know, from artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, all kinds of things, and a lot of that is great, but not all of that is great in all ways. So that's why in that use of data box here, we got some red there, which is, you know, a type of threat. So not every business opportunity is great for everybody. It comes with downsides. What's the other opportunity? Criminal opportunities, because crime never sleeps, criminals never stop. And if I were to put this in 2 buckets, theft of funds and theft of data. You know, most crime is for profit. It's about making money. How can they make money by victimizing someone? And sometimes they're stealing the money directly. Sometimes they're stealing the data, and they're going to use that data to commit a fraud, to steal in another way. So we've got those 2 main opportunities, and we try to take some actions to protect against that. Sometimes we take the actions because we want to voluntarily, and sometimes because there are rules that make us do that. And some of those actions to protect include cybersecurity, stop that cybercrime, anti-fraud, stop them from stealing the money or committing fraud. And then let's not forget anti-money laundering, because when crime is for profit, which most crime is, especially cybercrime, They got to make money, move money, hide the money. So to protect against that, we can't forget how important anti-money laundering is. So if we've got this rampant crime, cybercrime, and bad things happen, government wants to do something, and they create laws to protect us. And two main types of laws: criminal laws and civil laws. So the criminal laws are there to punish and deter, tell people, don't do this conduct or we're going to punish you. So hopefully some people say, okay, too risky, I'm not going to break the law because of the risk of getting caught. Some people don't want to break the law because they want to do what's proper and right and ethical. And then there's civil laws and regulations, which is trying to change conduct with the threat, not of real punishment or jail, but maybe fines or other enforcement. So if technology has created all these opportunities and risks, and if we looked at how those areas intersected 25 years ago, how do they intersect today? Well, think of technology as this big bubble that is in every part of our lives, and a big intersection with law. Law is always evolving, and specialties in law are always evolving, and there's now specialties in law relating to technology. And then how does business fit into that? So this is how I think of it. And look at that intersection area. 25 years ago it was a tiny slice, and now it's this huge area. And I think one of the biggest areas of intersection is cybercrime. And, if I had to make this diagram fit, so the cybercrime bubble is smaller than I think it should be, but I think cybercrime is just a big factor that the diagram doesn't depict how important it is. So there's cybercrime. With cybercrime, we've got the investigation of cybercrime, cybersecurity, data breach notification. So in the US, that was the first laws that came relating to cybercrime. Privacy and e-discovery, which relates to litigation. Now, all of those are complicated areas. But I think there's ways to take helpful steps forward to try to understand them and help our organizations through them and our clients and customers. So talk for a little bit about business and commerce. Now, humans have been providing, selling, buying goods and services to each other for thousands and thousands of years in all different ways, right? And it's evolved with human society. People need to eat. They need to feed their kids, provide shelter for their family, a roof over their heads. So that's basic survival. And then, and we're looking for a better way of life than that. Standard of living increases. We want other things. Maybe we want to make it rich, want to form businesses, grow our businesses, provide goods and services, employ people. And, then government regulates that a little bit. Government wants to tax. But as we think about business and my work in anti-money laundering, it makes me think how people pay each other and how payments have evolved. So once upon a time, there was no currency and maybe no currency substitutes. So you bartered. You might raise chicken and eggs and you barter with someone who grows grain. And then from barter, there were other ways to trade and transfer value. Currency substitutes like gold, and then currencies. And even when there have been currencies, people trade value outside of currencies. So, in the early days of virtual currency, when I was a prosecutor investigating cyber criminals and their use of virtual currency, it was hard to wrap my head around this concept of a virtual currency. It seemed new and foreign. But really, the more I thought about it, it's not new, it's not foreign, it's just humans finding a creative way to transfer value, and they've been doing that since the beginning with barter. As I said, hawala, an ancient, not ancient, but thousands of years old way of transferring value from the Middle East. So virtual currency, Bitcoin, it uses technology to do an old thing in a new way, but it's not totally new. As we're talking business and commerce, let's think cybercrime, because that is its own business. That's its own economy. And in a way, it's the freest market there is, because even though it's illegal, it violates the criminal law. They operate in the underground and essentially without regulation, as long as they don't get caught. So how about a math problem? Have we done any math yet today? Let me give you a math problem. If we take this technology and the internet, we add in the criminal element, and there have always been criminals. There's always been people trying to take advantage of other people, to victimize them, to take what other people earned as their own. What do you get when you add these two things together? You get cybercrime. And what cybercrime is this fascinating thing, because that's the first time people were able to victimize someone far away from them. So you could steal now through cybercrime from someone in another country. You could steal data. You could use that data to make money, to steal. You can steal funds. And that's a pretty amazing thing. And it's created a new dimension in criminal justice and national relations that did not exist before. Now, I had this front row seat investigating cybercrime in its early days when I was a prosecutor, and that was pretty cool. And I put some vignettes about that in my new book on cybercrime investigations. But when you think about cybercrime in the context of crime, crime's been around since people have been around, and maybe even before that, because you could argue some animals steal from other animals and victimize other animals, right? Well, you know, an animal needs to eat another animal for food, and that animal getting eaten might not appreciate that so much. But, you know, for people have been victimizing each other for a long time, and societies for a long time have created rules to discourage that kind of victimization and theft. So theft crimes have been on the books for a long time. Now, credit created a new dimension. You can get credit. You can borrow money in your name. You can get a credit card and charge money on that credit card account in your name. And that created the possibility of identity theft, which identity thieves and cyber criminals exploit. And that created some legal and jurisdictional issues, which was tough for law enforcement. I remember being a police officer when identity theft was getting started, and you got a victim in one city and state and the perpetrator in another state. That creates a problem. That makes it really, really tough, creates jurisdictional issues, and eventually identity theft laws were created. But it meant data became valuable. Personal data, you know, your name, your birth date, social security number, that can unlock credit in order to steal money and victimize someone. So we've got this cybercrime economy, and things become important that were not important before. Data breaches, data trafficking, identity theft, making money, profit, money laundering, payments, and virtual currency. So all of that took on new importance. Cybercrime becomes a really important part of criminal activity, the internet, and now it's being worked into the law, which leads us into the law. So as a lawyer, I like to talk about law and hopefully explain it in terms that non-lawyers can understand. How long would you think law has been around? So I might qualify my answer. Western law, hundreds of years. I remember being in law school reading legal decisions from a judge who wrote it hundreds of years ago, laying out a principle of contract law or a principle about murder hundreds of years ago, which may have now a role in today's legal system. But law goes much further back than that. If we think about religious laws and other informal laws for society to help societies be efficient, stop people in that society from conflict with each other or killing each other. We've got this evolution of laws that goes back thousands of years. And there are principles of law, traditional law, that we should know to think about law and how it applies to technology. So those are the traditional principles. And then we've got recent laws enacted specifically to address the issues that technology has brought. And we're going to talk about that too. So quick minute on criminal law, which I talked about. Remember, we've got criminal law and civil law. So let's not forget criminal law, designed to punish criminal behavior. This is where the government could put someone in jail, take away their liberty. And we got traditional criminal laws like larceny, theft. And then we've got new laws designed to specifically address cybercrime activity. And in the United States, there's a federal law, a national law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And then states have their own criminal laws. But enough about criminal law. Let's talk civil laws, because these are what a lot of organizations may have trouble with complying with, or some organizations, frankly, don't even know they exist. I call these external rules or requirements because when I'm advising an organization, I say, okay, here are the things outside your organization, external rules you need to be aware of as you create your internal rules. And this is a list. I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. There's negligence law, contract law, rules of litigation. These are all traditional areas of law. And now we've got technology, cybersecurity specific laws, data disposal, breach, privacy laws, and more. So let's talk a little bit more about them. And for me, the more I think about this, it all comes back to negligence law. If I'm advising an organization, I want to advise that organization to be diligent, be reasonable, don't be negligent, don't be sloppy, be diligent, be reasonable in your cybersecurity and in all that you do. Basically, negligence law could make one organization liable for a criminal act by a third party. And this is not unprecedented with or unique to cybersecurity. This applies to premises security. When you go to a hotel and sleep there, you're hoping that hotel has reasonable security that you're not going to be victimized while you're staying in that hotel. So the elements for negligence, a cause of action, you got to show there's a duty, you got to show there was a breach of that duty, and that caused damages, and the damages would be the money you're suing for. So that's negligence law. We don't want to forget contract law, another traditional area law. And many contracts implicate cyber. So we want to read our contracts. We want to know what's in them. There may be promises, representations, a requirement of reasonable security, a promise that you'll monitor for a breach and reasonably investigate and notify, and there may be waivers or limitations of damage. So we always have to look to contract law. Again, traditional law that applies to the cyber era. And hopefully we avoid a legal dispute, but if we do, we have to know that there's rules for that litigation, including what data you turn over to the other party, because there's a fact-finding process in a litigation, and that implicates electronic discovery or e-discovery. So that means investigating, finding data, doing forensics, analyzing it, turning it over. So those are all traditional legal concepts that impact cyber. And now we have a host of specific laws that relate to cybersecurity and breach notification. And as I look at the history of these laws, it started with data disposal laws. And think about that. So here in the US, a lot of states realized that companies were throwing sensitive data out. They were throwing old computers out or selling them without deleting that personal information that was on them. Or they'd leave a filing cabinet full of paper out on the curb for pickup as trash because they didn't want to expend the resources to securely shred the paper. So states said, can't throw out that data. You got to securely delete it, which, if you think about it, is kind of like that bottom rung of protection of data. Then we got these data breach notification laws. In California, state in the West Coast in the US, led the way. A state law saying if a company is breached, they are required by law to report that breach to the state and to the people affected by that breach. And that was a new thing, because think about it. Before these laws, and now, by the way, every state in the United States has a breach notification law. But before those laws, do you think most companies reported the breaches? Most probably kept it quiet because it was bad for business to tell their customers that they got breached. Then we've got these reasonable cybersecurity laws, states saying, you know what, we want to do more. We don't just want to pass a law about throwing out your data or telling us when you're breached. We want to pass a law that will make you improve your cybersecurity so you're not going to get breached as much. Excuse me. Now, our federal government, the United States government, really has not passed any law of general applicability on cybersecurity or data breach reporting or privacy. So Brazil, you're ahead of us on that. But there are some federal rules about unfair and deceptive trade practices, and that is enforced by our Federal Trade Commission, but they've only got a very limited capacity to enforce that. And states can enforce that too through a state attorney general. So here's an example of a state law, my home state, New York State, that requires a reasonable degree of cybersecurity and requires notification after a breach. It's found in our state general business law, and there's the site, the citation to the statute. And basically it says you have to have reasonable cybersecurity to store personal data, and you have to notify people when there's a breach of that data and notify the government. And you have to protect that data with reasonable cybersecurity. So that's the New York State law in a nutshell. Now, there are privacy laws too. And it's maybe called a privacy law, but it impacts information governance. It impacts information security for sure. So if you want to think of my bubbles, cybersecurity and privacy, they overlap a lot. And privacy is about that data you collect, store, share, and use. European Union pretty much has been leading the way for many years, including with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. Brazil, you've got a new data protection law too. And I've got a slide on that coming up. California, we've got all these state laws being enacted on privacy, and that makes things complicated. Privacy policies are everywhere, and think of contract law when you think of a privacy policy, because a privacy policy is a contract between the business and their customer or client or visitor. Now, I can't read Portuguese. I apologize. I had to use Google Translate. Things get lost in the translation, and I am not a lawyer in Brazil. But you've got a comprehensive data protection law. It's similar to GDPR, and it implicates cybersecurity in multiple places. I went through the statute. And Article 6, early article, it says personal data processing activities must observe the following principles. I'm skipping a little, but Section 7 says security, use of technical and administrative measures capable of protecting personal data from unauthorized access. And it goes on. Security is mentioned throughout. So Brazil's new privacy law requires certain protections for security. Now, certain sectors have rules for them. So think health, financial, and more. So these are specific sectors, not general applicability, but there are rules for specific sectors. So in the US, we've got HIPAA and high tech, and the slide spells out what those are. States can have rules too. Financial sector for banks, money transfer, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, Sarbanes-Oxley, and all these other rules, right? If you're a bank in the US, you may be regulated by the state, you may be regulated by the FDIC, and it's confusing here in the United States because we have a lot of these financial regulators, different types of banks regulated by a different entity, but they all banded together to put out these FFIEC rules to try to streamline things. That's the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. They'll go in and examine the IT systems to make sure they're safe, sound, secure. So there's rules there. And for all of these other different types of financial organizations, maybe it's investment, and states can have their rules too. Of course, I'm partial to New York State. And New York State put out their own rule. This was a big deal. And a lot of banks got nervous because someone had to sign on that saying we're in compliance, and it's part of that annual inspection. Schools have to follow certain rules, and other regulators, other regulated industries as well. And if you want to do business with the government, the federal government, you've got rules you've got to comply with too, and professions do also. So it's a lot. It can seem confusing, right? But if you're an organization, you got to figure out where you fit in, what rules you must comply with. So those are rules you need to comply with. Maybe you want to look to some guidance. And guidance is not a rule. Guidance is something you may decide you want to follow because it'll help you organize your cybersecurity. Something I'm proud of is John Bandler's 4 Pillars of Cybersecurity, which is plain and simple that the lay person can understand. You don't have to be an IT professional or information security professional to understand my 4 pillars of cybersecurity, because I think it's a common sense way of thinking about it. And I'm not going to talk about these other frameworks because my time is running short, but there are a lot of different ones from a lot of great organizations built by a lot of smart people to help organizations organize their cybersecurity and their controls. Again, I'm sorry, I don't have time to go through all of them as time is running short, but this is a partial list, and that's not all of them. There's a lot more. Now, part of cybersecurity is incident response planning. You can't ignore that. And we want to, if something bad happens, we want to mitigate it, make the harm less, detect it, respond well so the harm is less. And also, if we plan for it and let our high managers know how bad these things are, we might prevent it. Now, if it happens, we got to respond appropriately and quickly. Figure out what happened, right? Get accurate facts, because if we know what's happening, we can make a good decision about how to respond, how to stop it, and what steps to take next. And we might be obligated by law to report it. The Brazil law requires data breach reporting, as do most of these privacy laws. So if we've got all these different requirements, rules, and guidance frameworks, how do we harmonize them? How do we know what applies to us? And when we know what applies to us, how do we comply with it? It's hard. And if we think of all of these different rules, I'll make a different bubble for each of them. So each of those bubbles might be a rule or a framework. And it'd be nice if they were all clearly written using the same language and terminology, but they're not. Which is why they're all kind of it's confusing. They're wiggling around, they're moving targets. It's hard to know exactly what they mean. And we got to remember, we can't read each rule in isolation. We have to put those rules together so that we can protect our organization or protect our client's organization. We have to try to harmonize those rules, because in a way they're going to overlap, but also each rule may have unique requirements. So this is my perspective on that compliance and protection. Number one, we look to the external rules. That's the first column we have to think about. What are those laws we need to comply with? What regulations, what contracts, and more. So we identify those first. Now we create rules for our organization. Now, unwritten rules are often not worth the paper they're written on. You know what I'm saying? We got to put those rules to writing, the right amount of documentation, not too much writing, but not nothing. We got to create some policies, make rules. And finally, we got to practice what we preach. So that's the third column. Our action has to align with our internal rules, and it has to align with the external rules. So that's why I like to say, watch that gap. Build those columns so that that gap between them is minimal or none. And that's how we protect the organization, right? We're protecting ourselves from cybercrime. We're protecting ourselves from a compliance issue too. So we want to have documentation. How much, what level of detail? It's got to be the right amount. A policy for cybersecurity, incident response, and privacy. And maybe we need other documentation. Identify the external rules, guidance, create internal rules, and action follows policy. We got to train people and demonstrate our compliance, implement controls. So again, we got external rules, add in external guidance, create our internal rules, and action follows policy. So that's the way I think. Let's create these documents, and then do our documents, the ones we created, do they comply with the external rules? Do they point to helpful guidance? Are they readable, practical, well organized? Do they establish an internal mechanism for governing our information assets? Are they updated? And are they known and followed by organization members? 1 minute on how we can fight cybercrime better, because we're not doing it as well as we need to. Cybersecurity is important. Every organization needs cybersecurity, no matter how small the organization. We've all got to improve our cybersecurity, but remember, cybersecurity alone will not do it. It's not enough. I use the castle wall analogy. You can't just put up walls. You have to defend the walls. There has to be a deterrence. There has to be risk for the attackers. And that risk has to be law enforcement. So we need to investigate cybercrime. An investigation is done by the public sector and the private sector. Public sector cannot investigate alone. Private sector has to do it. But what the public sector needs to do, what government needs to do, is apprehend them. Apprehend more cyber criminals, bring them to justice. There has to be deterrence, has to be punishment. There needs to be national and international pressure to investigate and bring cyber criminals to justice. We can't have some countries turning a blind eye to cybercrime. We can't have some countries committing cybercrime or encouraging it. There's got to be national and international pressure. And I should add, in that investigation of cybercrime, it's got to include following the money, because remember that cybercrime is done for profit. Now, final thoughts. Concluding, I'm almost done, folks. We got this large intersection of these important areas: technology, cybersecurity, cybercrime, law, and business. The more all of us know about each area, it may not be our special area, but the more we know about those other areas, that helps. Evolution is going to continue in all of those areas. Cybercrime will never stop. Defenses need to improve. Got to improve our defenses. We need to investigate cybercrime better. government must do more to bring cyber criminals to justice, all of the governments. And thank you so much for your attention. I hope this was thought-provoking. I've got free resources on my website, johnbandler.com. Feel free to connect with me on social media or by email. And resources at johnbandler.com. Look for the articles section. Check out the pages about my 2 books, Cybersecurity and on cybercrime investigations. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. I do hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was informative and thought-provoking. I'll try to take all of your questions during the chat, but if I don't get to them, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Just mention that you saw me on this presentation so I can help determine you're not spam. And reach out if I can be a resource or if you have comments on the presentation. Again, thank you so much, and thanks Raphael and to the conference team for having me and all of you for tuning in. So thank you very much.